You're watching The Lookout, a production of the Division of World Languages and Cultural Studies here at Minot State University. I'm your host, Samuel Stinson. On the program today, we have Dan Conn. Our good friend Dan Conn from Education is here to talk with us today about his recent book that he co-wrote, Unraveling the Assessment Industrial Complex, Understanding How Testing Perpetuates Inequity and Injustice in America. Dan and I also recently went to Albuquerque and participated at the AATC conference there. So we have a lot to talk about. Dan Conn, thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
So Dan, I was looking at your book, Unraveling the Assessment Industrial Complex. And of course, you have two co-authors.
Correct. Yes, Michelle, who helped me write the article that really inspired the book. She's somebody I continue to work with today. And then our good friend, Paul Parkinson from the University of North Florida.
So what was it really that started this conversation that eventually became the book?
Well, it actually started in Portland, Maine, and there's another book called the Curriculum Studies Reader, which is like an anthology of articles and scholarly work about curriculum, dating all the way back to like the early 1900s to present things. And anyway, the editors of that had a roundtable session at the American Association of Teaching and Curriculum, which I know we're going to talk about later. And we were at a session just talking about what should go in their next edition, in the 5th edition. And one of my all-time heroes, Nell Noddings, she's from Stanford University and has a lot of influence in care theory and how we think about that in schools. Anyway, she was the keynote, and she's also in the Curriculum Studies Reader, which is what they were talking about. And so they wanted to know what should be in it. And Michelle, whom I mentioned earlier, Michelle Teenham Zamak, her and I were manning the bookstore, and all week we'd been talking about the assessment industrial complex and how there are these assessment forces that just make us lose our mind and control us. And anyway, in doing that, we had some deep discussions, and then we were at this session talking about what should go into the book, and we threw out the assessment industrial complex. And Nell Noddings, who was my hero, is like, that is a really good idea, and you two need to research that. Nell Noddings was like 84, I think, at the time, so elderly. She's still alive today, but it felt like this kind of calling, like, you need to go do this. And so anyway, that sent us in this journey, and it started off with an article, and then the article had some success, and we happened to be in Toronto and pitched the idea. Somebody from Routledge was there and had heard about us and wanted to know more and pitched the idea, and then it turned into a book.
So that term, the assessment industrial complex, could you talk a little bit more about that? What is that exactly? How does that differ from the regular assessment that academics will usually find ourselves doing?
That's a great question. So first of all, when we think of assessment as we know it in America, where students might take a test or produce some work, that actually has only really been around since the 1840s. And so the testing phenomenon is a relatively new thing. And there are certainly utility in testing, and I'm not against assessment. And I think tests, have their place. But the assessment industrial complex, what that's based on is political and corporate interest that make a lot of money and have a lot of power and control through standardized assessments. And so standardized assessments really begin with the eugenics movement, and kind of this quasi science of trying to make a standardized human. And things like the IQ test, the SAT test, they really have a lot of their roots in eugenics, even how students get into college and who gets in and who doesn't get in. And so the assessment industrial complex kind of follows this continuum of using assessments to keep students out, to decide, what kind of society we want according to the people in power. But it also becomes very profitable. And after especially No Child Left Behind, about 4 companies really get a lot of power, and they make crazy amounts of money producing tests every year. And the way that the laws are written, the more tests you take, the more you can prove proficiency. And so it becomes this thing where schools more and more take tests. I know when I first started back in 2004, I was in K-12. Students took 1, maybe 2 tests a year. now, my students take five, or excuse me, my own children take five or so a year, which is pretty incredible. In our book, we talk about the average U.S. student, K-12, will take over 100 tests in their academic lifetime, standardized tests, which is just a crazy number. And not only, I mean, you could go down the road of, is this a good idea? And we argue it perpetuates inequalities and all these things, but it's also very, very expensive. A trillion-dollar industry, hundreds of billions of dollars on an annual basis going into standardized assessment, plus all the prep work. It's just a crazy thing. So I'll kind of take a pause, but it is, if the military-industrial complex, the more we go to war, and people make money off going war, and things like that. And it's that same sort of phenomenon in which the more we test, the more we need to test. And there's a lot of political rhetoric and a lot of corporate interest and lobbyists. And it is quite the complex.
Yeah, as you're talking, it reminds me of that notion of Taylorism, right? Building things at scale, replicability, mass production. And I'm reminded also when I was growing up, K through 12, we had taken something called the CTBS, the California Test of Basic Skills. Years later, we had CARA, the Kentucky Education Reform Act, which brought its own slew of assessments. It just seems like no matter what, anytime we have one of these systems in place and there's a reform movement, it leads to additional assessments, additional testing. It doesn't seem like there's a cyclical nature to all this, where one testing will beget just a whole new series of tests.
Absolutely. And that's, you hit it on the head. And not only that, but it's becoming more of a monopoly. And like Pearson has more and more control over at ETS, which a lot of our Minot State faculty and students might be interested in, has a lot of control over it. But it's not just, people using assessments in a variety of ways, but it's becoming just a select few deciding what counts and what doesn't count for learning. And of course, only that which is tested counts. And that's a problem in and of itself, because you start focusing on subjects that count on the test, and not just that, but manifestations of those subjects so they count on tests. So when we think of reading, we only really think of it in terms of comprehension, maybe some fluency with regard to early reading intervention and things like that. But otherwise, often on tests, it's just a matter of comprehension, which we know that reading serves so many other purposes. It's funny, it makes us laugh, it makes us cry. It's reading is more than just, do you remember what was on the last passage?
Teaching to the test arises out a lot of assessments, right? So the notion that we have to teach in order that students will be proficient in the test in terms of that, instead of just teaching for its own sake, learning for its own sake, being able to learn this in terms of a growth model of education, perhaps. So with all of these assessments in mind, I'm reminded also of our conversations before, because again, as an acknowledgement, Dan, Conn, and I co-teach multiple graduate courses together in English, and we've done this for several years. And one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit has been, of course, in writing studies, the difference between process and product, between showing evidence of process, evidence of practice, versus a highly polished draft that is usually very much sought after. And that sometimes writers will go into that situation and think, what I really want to do is really polish what I've got and get something that really will impress somebody. But as educators, we think, well, let's wait and delay that just a little bit to where we can think about what are the moves that we're practicing in terms of learning and developing and growth and understanding what it is that writing is doing. So we've had all those conversations in our own fields and in our own interdisciplinary work together. So with respect to what you've written and this book, what do you think are some things that as educators that we can take away from knowing about this complex, knowing about this whole move toward overassessment and how it keeps repeating? What are some things that we ought to think about and take away from this that we can put into effect in response to it?
That's a really great question. I appreciate that. So one thing that I would just point out right away is there's this thing called the ecology of the school. And it's this idea that it's a mutual interaction with our curriculum, how we teach, how we structure our classroom or our day, if you're teaching, K-12 and elementary and things like that, and our evaluation, how we think of our students, how we think of ourselves in terms of our performance. intentions, our intentions as a teacher, intentions as a student. And we can see this ecological relationship really for a long time, going all the way back to, like, the days of Greek education, paideia, and things like that. You can see it in other cultures. I'm into like Ojibwe ways, and you can see this interaction in those cultures. In U.S. education, particularly after the rise of standardized assessment, the ecology is thrown off, and what happens is the assessment takes over. Even how we think of evaluation is really through the eyes of assessment. We judge the teachers on the test scores, and in so many cases we judge the students on the test scores. The curriculum, it's related to the test. Those subjects that are tested more, they get taught more. They get taught more explicitly. In many cases, schools even say, make the curriculum about the test, teach to the test. That used to be a bad thing, and now schools do that. In terms of teaching, same thing. We're encouraged sometimes in teacher ed programs to not go off on our own interest as much, to not let too much space for student dialogue, because we need to cover so much. And so when it comes to teaching, the test really dictates how much we can engage with students, how much conversation we can have, because we got to keep it going, because of what's on the test. Even how we teach, thinking of in our classes, I know we try to make it more democratic, where everybody has knowledge. In the case of the test, as you teach, if it's already been determined on the test, that sort of changes the nature in which we teach. Thinking of how we structure our days, I have seen firsthand in schools where they base whole weeks, even longer, on tests. Where in elementary classrooms, those tested subjects like reading get 90 minutes, math 90 minutes, social studies 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So you can see the whole ecology of classrooms and schools really out of whack. That's not how it should be. So if you're a teacher, if you're a student, if you're somebody that's affected by those tests, I think you have to sort of see that lens, see what's happening, see how our priorities might be off. I'm not saying we're going to change that overnight. I'm not saying that it's something that is going to just go away. But I think when we think of our own self-worth, when we think of, what's worth fighting for, how we talk to students, how we think about students, we have to realize that the test has kind of overtaken things, and it's really distorted reality and what's real and what's not real. Even, I've heard teachers talk about students as if they're labels, like my low students, my high students, my fours, my high flyers. It really dehumanizes each other. It dehumanizes our students when we talk through those labels that are really produced through, corporate political interests that are very much interested in making those corporations as much money as they can and keeping those politicians in control, and really not allowing us to have some critical discussion in our classrooms, which I think we're seeing with, some of what's spilling out in school board meetings and things like that.
Walk us through a little bit about what's it like to set up a conference like this? I mean, it seems like there's so many steps involved. What were some things that you had to do in order to get everything running?
Oh, it was quite the process. So yeah, in Albuquerque, where we were at, we went earlier in the summer and checked out, hotels and restaurants and entertainment, and really tried to think about how to orchestrate everything. And then for a conference like this, because it's peer reviewed, people send in proposals, and those proposals have to be reviewed by academics throughout the country and even into Canada and international places. And so you have to find reviewers, qualified reviewers, and each proposal I had to find at least 2, if not 3 reviewers for. And so we had over 200 proposals. And so as you can imagine, that's quite a few people to find and academics to search down. So just that in itself was difficult. And then you had to write people back and say who's accepted and who's not accepted. In terms of just the conference itself, trying to think of where to fit in those keynote speakers, how to make sure everybody gets fed and communicated to. There's an interesting generational gap, because you need to have enough paper copies for people that want paper copies, but a lot of people, are on their phone and they don't need a paper copy, and you need things digital. And so trying to meet that array of needs is always a trick. A budget, we had a very big budget, about a $40,000 budget that we had to maintain and find out a way to pay for busing and food and hotels and all kinds of things. One big hurdle we had is the Balloon Fest was there, the Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta. And so hotel spaces, we had a block, but once those were gone, then rates went up like $400-$500 a room. And so I was trying to find people rooms and make sure everybody had a place to stay and could afford it. But overall, it was a really cool experience, and got to meet people from really all around the country, and even into Canada and beyond. So it was a cool experience, and I was so proud to present with you, Samuel. I think we had quite a impressive audience of people that were in the room, and it was cool to introduce you to my world of curriculum.
Absolutely. And it was great to be able to sit on the panel together. We had quite the panel also. We had yourself and myself. We had several others as well. And to be able to have that exchange and that discussion between the fields of education and composition studies, it was really a treat also. And the feedback we got was really interesting as well. And again, we were talking largely in our panel, right, about the classes that we teach together, the grad courses, the collaborative approach we take. So I was going to ask you, with those classes in mind, again, we've done this now for 2 years. What were some of the things so far? What are some of the highlights of those classes that you and I have taught together? What are some of those that you'd like to share, those that stand out the most to you?
One is, so I have taught language arts or writing in one form or another really throughout my life. And I've always dabbled with the writing process. I thought I understood it. It made sense to me. You pre-write, you draft, you revise, you edit, you publish. I knew the steps, I knew clever ways to do it. I had elementary books. And you, Samuel, Dr. Stinson, have taught me so much. You and the book Writing About Writing, that is, that combination about really what the writing process is and what's possible, thinking of Elbow's work and encouraging students to make this work their own, and how to make the writing process something that's fair and meaningful for them. And so for me, it was like I always understood the writing process, but not at this level. And I think now, it's like you talk about, I'm not just a better writer, or excuse me, my writing's not just better, but I'm a better writer. And I think I can help my students to see that and help other students to see that. It's such a breakthrough for me. So highlight number one is I figured out like how to use the writing process in a really cool, pedagogically meaningful way that students appreciate, that's relevant, that they take the class over and over again. That doesn't usually happen to me in all my years of education. So just, I guess, being mentored by you is what I would say in short. And then the second piece, that advanced institute that we had last summer through the Northern Plains Writing Project, several came through the course that we taught together, the topics course, and then also through the writing project. And what they wrote at the end, those memoirs, I just was so proud. I've been proud of students' work, but it just felt like collectively, like these were all kind of mini masterpieces, and you could see them come through this process of the writing process and writing about their own writing and thinking about their own writing and that kind of thing. And if I could add like just a cherry on top to that, they made their own writing group. Some of them have now started their own writing group from this kind of course set. And I think I saw it culminating last summer in the class, and then just to see them even leave the class and they're still supporting each other. They're still writing, and they're all such good writers. I mean, that's the thing is their writing has really improved, even though they were strong before. They're thinking about feedback and even what their goals are as writers and things like that. So I don't know. I felt like we empowered people, which doesn't always happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the memoirs also. Those were the most meaningful to me, I think, as well. And again, for students who've gone through both years of the process and have taken all 4 of the grad courses, it was phenomenal to see their own thought process develop. And the way that it sequenced, right, the last 2 courses act almost like a capstone to the process. And to see both in the memoir capacity and the professional teacher statement where they are as an educator, where they are personally as a writer, and drawing on both sets of experiences, the professional side, the personal side. And again, I've also heard feedback from those who've gone through the program saying it was just phenomenal in terms of being able to get that exposure. Um, and I really appreciate your thoughts of what you said earlier and your praise. Dan, kind of have nothing but praise for you, and I really appreciate your collaboration in all of this. My experience has been wonderful in the process. So thank you so much for being part of it as well. Thinking about the work that our students do, if you could plan a writing class on top of everything we've done together that brings together what you've done in education, what I've done in English, what we've worked together in our interdisciplinary focus. I'm going to say that again. What we've done in our interdisciplinary focus. What would that dream course be? Would it build on everything we've done, or would it be something totally different?
Oh, I love it. No, it would build on what we've done, and it would most definitely involve the writing process. I think one of the great finds that we've had is this multimodality piece and the possibilities, whether it's making podcasts or critiquing movies or just thinking about language and media in so many ways. It's breathtaking. I think, it's something that it really revitalizes why we use language and why we learn and how we make meaning of the world. So I would want to base it definitely around the writing process, and then just keep digging with this idea of multimodalities. I think locally here, it would be fun to involve local curriculum. We've been talking, you and I, about Ojibways and some of their stories, and we have MHA Nation. We have a lot of homesteaders, and there's just this rich history in North Dakota. So it would be fun to, as we think of multimodalities, maybe local interviews, local artifacts. If we could somehow inspire that would be a dream come true.
I'm definitely all on board. I think this sounds great. Anything that gets the students out into the community, asking questions, learning as teachers, as scholar practitioners. And again, it seems like from everything we've done, it seems like the best move has always been to put the students in the driver's seat. Again, everybody is student centered. We have that trope, that canard, that chestnut. I'm going to get my thesaurus and get the rest of those terms, but that's there. But to actually say that the students themselves are driving the process, that their interests and their focus and their interest in the material is what's drawing out what's going on. That has been the best part of the process for me. And I think anything that captures that going forward, again, that would be my dream class too. So I think you've hit the nail on the head with that as well.
Well, let's do it. That maybe we need to cook up a class like that.
I think we should. So Dan Conn, thank you for being on the program again today.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Love your podcast, and it's an honor to be here.
And also, before we go, you are on EdHeads.
That's correct. Yeah. For your listeners, we have our own podcast called EdHeads. It's with me and my friend, Dr. Chelsea Therese Holtz, and we talk about all topics related to education. You can find us on the Good Talk Network, and we're also live on Facebook Live Fridays at 4. And anyway, hope you can tune in.
Thank you, Dan Conn. And everybody listening, go take a listen, go take a watch to EdHeads.
Edheads2.com is the website.
Edheads2.com. Well, everyone, we've reached that point in the program where we have to say goodbye, but thank you again for watching. It's that point in the semester where it seems like there's so much more to do, but we appreciate you sitting down and watching this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe on the YouTube channel if you're watching us there, and don't forget to suggest us to your friends. Thank you again. And as we always say at this point, this is Minot State University. Be seen, be heard, be inspired. And thanks again for watching.